Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of Days Gone By on Gran Turismo 6, and in this particular installment of this series, which for those who are maybe new, is a series where we review classic and vintage cars, and this car is not a vehicle which I'd initially planned to feature in this series. It's Ayrton Senna's WSR, or West Surrey Racing Formula car. This is, as far as I'm concerned, one of those very few race cars, in fact, which is ridiculously overpriced compared to how much it should cost. In my opinion, this car should not cost more than 100 grand. But unfortunately, Ayrton Senna's kart costs 100 grand, so of course this isn't going to cost the same. However, 1 million credits for a car with a 2-litre 174 horsepower engine and a top end speed of around 150 miles per hour isn't exactly my idea of a good deal. Now, with that being said, I'm going into this car with some level of negative emotion. However, the point of these reviews is to always put that at least as much as I can to one side and to evaluate each vehicle objectively rather than subjectively. Now, this car, as I said, is not a car which I'd originally planned to feature here, and the reason why I ultimately chose to is because of its age. It is from 1983, and as such, it does qualify as a classic. Usually, I would feature Formula cars or open wheel Grand Prix cars, that kind of thing, in random reviews, which is a series that we don't have many episodes of, and I featured the Formula Gran Turismo in that series. But one of the main reasons why I'm not featuring this car is because of the fact that not only is it real, but more importantly, that age. It does qualify, and since we have featured other race cars in this series as well, such as the Toyota 7 Can-Am, then it's justified. Now, with that being said, we've already touched on a couple of the specs. It costs 1 million credits, it's got a 2-litre mid-mounted, naturally aspirated engine, 172 horsepower with an oil change, a pretty decent 166 foot-pounds of torque, which in comparison to the power is pretty good, and it gets peak power and torque relatively low. 6,000 RPM for power, 5,000 RPM for peak torque, so you don't really have to work the engine all that hard. The weight on the car is very, very good. You'd expect it to be low, but it goes way beyond the Formula Gran Turismo or Senna's Lotus. It weighs 455 kilos. That's around 100 kilos less than those cars. However, it's a much smaller vehicle, it's working with much lighter tech, so of course it's going to be lighter. The horsepower per tonne is really good, mainly thanks to that low weight rather than its not exactly high power. 378 horsepower per tonne is pretty good. That's, say, tuned sports car territory, and the PP level, although I would say it is a little bit too high at 559, is still not exactly as bad as a Red Bull Junior, for instance. I've often referred to Red Bull Junior syndrome, which is what I refer to cars as having when their PP level is just ridiculously high, far too high for how good they actually are. You can put this car up against that Red Bull Junior, and although you may not necessarily beat it, the difference between the two cars isn't all that much, not on most technical circuits anyway. However, the difference in PP level is huge. That Junior is well over 700, this car is 559, which is pretty modest in comparison. Now, as far as good stuff and bad stuff, the bad stuff is fairly obvious. You've got such a tiny amount of power, comparatively speaking for a race car, that it's just not that quick on the straights. However, one of the good points about this car actually leads directly on from that, and it's a principle which I have talked about before, and it's a principle which is much more apparent in the world of motorbikes, specifically racing motorbikes. Because if you take a full-on 200 or 300 grand MotoGP bike around a track, and then take, say, a 5 grand learner legal 50cc or a 125 or a 250 at best, but say a 125 around that same track with the same professional driver, you're not going to see as big a difference on a tight circuit as you might expect. Of course there will be, it could be around 10 seconds difference, but given the difference in the bike, in the tech and in the price, it wouldn't necessarily be as big a difference as you might expect. And one of the main reasons for that is because you can push a slower, lighter, less powerful bike much harder than you can, say, a 200 horsepower MotoGP machine. Likewise with a car like this, you're basically going full throttle all the time. Now of course, you need to brake sometimes, but you can take corners at LMP speeds in this machine, and sometimes even better than an LMP, because your average speed in a car like this on a technical circuit is easily much higher than most sports cars would be at that same PP level. So although it's nowhere near quick enough on the straights, it struggles to pass 140 with full downforce. But if you take it on a track where you can't really use your performance in the higher ranges, and granted there aren't too many tracks like that, but there are some, Ascari for instance for the most part, or Laguna Seca even, it's a very useful car for tracks like that. Or even if you go tighter than that, such as London, or the GT Arena, or even Monaco, it's a very useful car for those kind of circuits. Now even then, it's not the most useful of machines, it's not a car which most people will use all the time. Some people might, but most people won't. So all in all, it's kind of a strange car to review in as much as comparing it to anything else. Yes, it's an open-wheel Formula car, but it's not like any of the other open-wheel Formula cars. It's nothing like the FGT, certainly nothing like Senna's Lotus, and the closest thing is pretty much the Red Bull Junior, which even then isn't really in the same category, because although the Red Bull is far cheaper, 1/5 of the price, the PP level is ridiculous, as we already said. So this is a car which is difficult to recommend, but at the same time I wouldn't necessarily say don't buy it. It's good at some things, but it's super niched, and ultimately the fact that Senna owned it contributes a lot to the price, of course, and it's, I would say, a collector's piece first and foremost, but unlike some collector's pieces, it does have some racing use, and for the use which it has, it is very good. If you're looking for handling, cornering speed and average speed around technical circuits, especially for newer drivers as well, it's an excellent car. The biggest shame, I would say, is that for a vehicle which is so genuinely brilliant for less experienced drivers to get a hang of how Formula cars work, they've gone completely against that advantage by pricing it way out of the range of any beginner. So that's a real shame. That's one of the main reasons why I'd say 100 grand would be much better. But overall, if you want to check out this car, it's certainly worth a look. Just don't expect too much from it, because it doesn't have too much to offer. And overall, that's it for this particular pick, so I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.